I know simple Google search or these days ChatGPT created a lot of savvy buyers out there. But in this video, I'm gonna talk about red flags when buying a home in Asheville, North Carolina, or in Western North Carolina for that matter, that you cannot ignore, you should not ignore, and some of them you cannot afford to ignore. Some of these red flags, yes, you can Google, you can do ChatGPT and kind of learn what you can do and how to identify them. But some of them that I'm going to be talking in this video, ChatGPT will not know. They come with experience not only living in this community, living in this area. Again, we've been here for almost 21 years, but also working in the industry. I've been in the business for almost 9 or 10 years, and I've seen a lot. By the way, do not believe anybody who says they've seen it all. It's a lie, but I've seen a lot, and I'm here to spill the beans so that you can be most prepared. I know one of the biggest red flags that is on everyone's minds right now, especially after Hurricane Helene hit our mountains, is of course flooding, flood zones and stuff like that. I mean, that's very obvious. You want a property that's not in the flood zone, that hasn't flooded. But there are some other red flags. There are some other things that you should be looking out for, or if we are working together, I will be doing that for you, that have nothing to do with flood zones, but they can impact the quality of life, property values, and your financial situation, honestly. So stay all the way to the end to hear about that red flag. So red flag number one, and that is something that you would have to go and look at the property in person or your agent on your behalf, and they should be able to identify that for you. And that is poor grading and drainage. So what I'm talking about is that, for example, this property that's right behind me, you see how in the front here, it slopes away from the house, you know, the way they graded it. When you look at the back of the property, it also slopes away from the property. In fact, it may be hard to tell, but the brick little pathway, it's kind of sloping, and when you walk on it, you kind of feel like you're gonna fall over. But that's good. It means that the water is draining away from the house. And I'm talking about the water that's, you know, rainwater that comes from the sky and just drains towards the house. So you want that to be draining away from the house. That is one way to divert the water. But also, if your gutters or downspouts are either missing, and yes, I've seen properties that don't even have gutters and downspouts, major red flag, or they are not installed properly, or maybe they're broken, they're damaged, they're stuffed with leaves and debris, and maybe even some plants are growing in them. I've seen that too. That's a red flag too. One of the things that I look out for outside the slope, you know, towards or away from the house, gutters. Sometimes the pitch of the roof is, you know, it's very steep, and the gutters are very small. So guess what? They're not gonna do the job. The water will be running right past them, and it's gonna be draining all the way towards the house. Red flag, not a good sign. So that is something you can only identify, you know, when you come in and looking at the house. It doesn't have to be a rainy weather. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious. And that brings me to red flag number two, and that is foundation issues. And of course, one of the obvious ones is foundation cracks. So water, among other things, can impact your foundation. And when you come and look at the property, or again, your agent on your behalf, if it's a virtual showing, should of course look at the exterior of the property and see if there are any cracks in a foundation, if there are any visible cracks. And of course, you know, if it's let's say a concrete type of foundation, or maybe part of the house is done with concrete, hairline cracks are very common. Every concrete will crack at some point. It's inevitable. But if you start looking inside, and if there are more cracks anywhere, not just in the foundation walls, but anywhere in the house, that can be correlated and connected. In any case, because you will do your inspection, I trust you, you should not skip your inspection. And so the inspector himself, the general inspector, will not be able to tell you whether those cracks are gonna be a big issue down the road, gonna cost you thousands of dollars. So they're gonna defer to the structural engineer. And about $800 later, they can tell you whether or not those cracks can grow into a bigger issue. But, you know, I know it sounds a lot, like a lot of money, but sometimes it's worth spending some money and then you can dodge the bullet. So little cracks in the foundation that you see or you can identify on the outside, on the exterior, as well as some cracks on the inside. And most typical cracks that you see, I mean, in many houses, honestly, would be hairline cracks that go kind of diagonally from the, you know, doors or windows. And again, do not skip your inspection, because your inspection is your kind of starting point at discovering more or not. If there's a correlated crack somewhere down in the basement, in the lower level, or in the foundation, then for sure, at least in my experience, those inspectors will recommend structural engineer take a look at those cracks and tell you how much it will or can potentially cost you. Red flag number 3, and that is something that you do not necessarily see on your end, even if you're looking at some listings on Zillow, realtor.com, but we as agents can see on our end, and seller disclosure is a good starting point to kind of discover some of those things. I tell my clients, trust but verify, but it can be a good starting point for things like the ages of main components of the house. I'm talking about the age of the roof, the age of HVAC, the age of hot water heater, and some other things like that. When you're looking at the house, and by the way, in North Carolina, unlike some other states, from what I hear from my clients, our roofs last quite a bit longer. And I've seen roofs that had absolutely no issues being, you know, 20, 30-year-old roofs. But when you look at the disclosure and it says that the roof is from 30 years ago, you know that it's at the end of its life. Same goes for HVAC. HVACs, I mean, again, we've seen a lot of HVACs that were a couple of decades old and they were running just fine. But you know what never fails is when you buy something, you move in and something will break, and it will be your luck. So do not ignore those red flags. And North Carolina, being a state where unless it's new construction, every house is sold as is, meaning, and yes, it is in the contract. Somebody was arguing with me in the comment section that it's a lie. It's in the contract to purchase, that every house, unless it's new construction, is sold as is. The seller does not have to negotiate anything, especially if they disclose you the age of the roof, the age of HVAC. You cannot, well, I mean, you can try to make a case, but it's going to be really hard. Coming back after inspections to say, well, by the way, the roof is not looking very well. You know, give us credit or replace the roof because it's getting old. Well, you knew that. You knew that. It's red flag. Make your decision accordingly. When making an offer, when offering non-refundable deposit, all those things, by the way, we discuss on our discovery call that is free of any kind of obligations. You can schedule it with me anytime. The calendar link is down in the description. Red flag number 4, and that might come as a surprise to some, but location, location, and location. We have a lot of people moving to the area from other states where apparently a lot of HOAs are just too crazy, too controlling, too restrictive. And a lot of people are telling me, we want no HOA because we want to do whatever we want. And a lot of times they are looking for open use zoning and kind of properties, which again, a lot allows you to do whatever you want, literally. You can, I mean, you can do what, use your imagination, okay? What this means, and I don't see it right here, kind of to give you an idea or as an example, but when you can do whatever you want on your property, guess what? Your neighbor can do whatever they want. And so what that can do is that you can have a nice house, you can have nice property, great curb appeal, you take care of the property. Next door neighbor might have a junkyard, might have a hog farm that will stink, might have just whatever they want. And so it can be a red flag, and this is something that you can discover only by visiting the property in person. I mean, yes, you can do Google search and Google Earth and all those kind of things, but Google search will not, oh, there's more bees, whoa, will, tragedy avoided. All right, so where was I? And so, yes, squirrel, you can look up what's around you, right? And you can kind of get an idea. But when you come to the property in person, you don't only see what's going on around you, and sometimes honestly you don't even see, because our area is not flat, and it's like you don't even see as far as you can some other stuff like a farm or, you know, mobile home park, which I know some people are against, or like a junkyard can be kind of down the hill, around the corner, you don't even see it. But sometimes it can, whatever they're doing, it can smell, it can be loud. So those things is something that you will only discover when you come and check out the property in person. So don't skip that, or have your agent, who is like me. And what I tell my clients, and you probably heard this on this channel multiple times, when I come and look at properties on behalf of my clients, I'm like a dog. I'll be your dog. I'll be your eyes, nose, and ears, because all those things are important. It's not just what everything looks like, but what everything smells like, what everything sounds like. And to some people, it can be more important than to others. Red flag number 5 is smell. This is one of the first things that I pay attention to when I open that door. And it doesn't have to be a bad smell. I'm not just talking about smell, that musty smell, or that something smells like it's moldy or, you know, musty. But also, some people use a lot of plugins. Sometimes they use a lot of candles and all those, you know, scents that can be a red flag. And a lot of people, a lot of buyers, in my experience again, immediately question, well, what are they trying to cover? What are they trying to cover up? And sometimes they don't try to cover up anything. People just like those plugins. So if you're on the sell side, by the way, be very careful with that. It can be a red flag for buyers. But, you know, again, it's one of those things that you have to come and visit the property in person to be able to smell, to be able to sniff out and see what it smells like. Although I swear, I can smell some of those photos of some of those houses, but I will say this too, that I've been surprised before. Anyways, a smell of mold or mildew can tell you that there are some issues. There are some issues with, again, water intrusion, and something might be stewing, or, you know, there might be mold behind the walls, mold in the basement, and mold can not only negatively affect your health, that's number one, but also can negatively affect the integrity of the house, the foundation of the house. So do not ignore this smell, whether it's good or bad. Red flag number 6. So this property is actually a perfect example for this, and that is when a property being flipped, renovated, updated, there's an addition, maybe they removed some walls and open up some spaces, maybe they remodeled the bathroom, and there are no permits. They didn't pull any permits, they just kind of, I don't know, hired Uncle Joe or did it themselves. So that can be a major red flag. First of all, why they never pulled permits? Because it's honestly not a hard thing to do. It doesn't cost that much to do it in that order, you know, in the correct order. It's gonna cost more, and it's gonna take a lot longer to get permits after the fact. But, you know, why they didn't do it?
Why?
And when no permits were pulled, it means nobody came to inspect the final product. In the example of this property right here, it was completely redone, and it was stripped down to studs, I believe. And there is a CEO on file. There's an actual CEO. So the whole property was redone, and there's a CEO. So you know that there were county inspectors who came and looked at everything at every stage of this remodel. So that can be red flag, huge red flag. and it can be a lot of headache down the road if you ignore that. Red flag number, I think it's 7. Gosh, I need to sit down. These shoes are killing me. Outdated and or dangerous materials that are no longer in use. They don't use them anymore in construction or remodels. And those are lead paint, those things like asbestos, those things like polybutyl pipes, and I would also include things like underground oil tanks in this category. So every property that's built before 1978 automatically comes with mandatory disclosure filled out by the seller that it may contain lead-based paint. Again, this property, it was built in the 60s, and even though it was completely remodeled and redone and they stripped everything to the studs, it still has to come with lead-based paint disclosure. And you're probably not gonna find any lead-based paint in this house, maybe on the exterior, but not inside. But in other cases, you know, there may be some lead paint present in the property, in the house. In many cases, properties that are that old and have lead-based paint will have a lot of layers of regular paint that don't have any lead. But anyways, lead-based paint is specifically dangerous to younger kids, and so you should pay kind of closer attention to that. Asbestos typically been used in, you know, siding, so exterior, sometimes in some of the insulation, sometimes in tiles that they used to, you know, use for the flooring, sometimes in ceiling tiles, so in various different building materials. And you should never handle asbestos yourself. You should always hire a professional who would basically come in hazmat suits and, you know, take care of that. But what a lot of people do when they remodel homes, instead of removing the asbestos siding, they just cover it up. And that is perfectly acceptable and normal. And we see that it a lot in this area, at least, that, you know, there will be asbestos siding behind another newer, updated siding that they used. Polybutyl pipes is something that they used during this one period of time, and they proved to be faulty and they proved to bust and burst, so not a good situation. And again, another thing that I always look, one of the first things that I look at when I look at the seller disclosure, that again I see on my end, you do not see on yours, but I always look and check what the pipes are made from. And if it's a polybutyl pipe, I will make a note and point this out to my buyers. And underground oil tanks can be a big pain in the neck. Again, they mostly come with old houses. Newer homes don't use them, but we do have some properties that still have them in use. So not only they are there, they are underground, but they are actually using them to heat the property. You know, what we know from working with underground oil tanks is that they can leak, and that can be a huge environmental issue. And in fact, your lender or appraiser for your lender may or may not even flag a property with underground oil tank and ask for additional, you know, inspections and all this kind of stuff. So always check or have your agent and work with somebody who even knows to look for stuff like that. Check for things like that I just mentioned for this red flag. Red flag number 8, and that is a dual agency, which dual agency is allowed in North Carolina and is practiced. But for example, we decided to never offer dual agency to our clients, meaning that if we list a property, we will not represent the seller and the buyer buying, selling the same property. We will not work in the dual agency capacity because, you know, there's just a little gray area, and there's always room for, you know, mistrust, and it always goes down to how ethical the agent is. But we just don't even want to go there. We do not do that. And that's what I always recommend to all of my clients. Get your own agent. There's absolutely no reason for you not to get your own agent when you're buying a property in North Carolina. Even after all the lawsuits that we had last year and all the new rules, we find that I want to say 95, if not more, % of sellers still offer compensation to buyer's agents. So you as a buyer would not have to worry in most cases about compensating your buyer's agent. So why not get exclusive representation where you know that, well, you should be confident enough in your agent that they will represent your best interests and will be able to advise you and will be able to be there and have your best interests in mind. And this next little item is in the same category with agency and dual agency or not dual agency, but another part of it is actually an agent who works on the other side. And again, this is not something that you can Google. This is not something that ChatGPT can tell you about, but this comes from my personal experience working in this industry, in this area, with a lot of local agents here for almost 10 years. And some of those agents on the other end, when I see a certain name, I will be extra cautious. I will check and double check everything twice or 3 times, just because I know that that agent is not trustworthy. That agent has done some sketchy stuff, and that is red flag for me personally. And again, not something that you can Google, not something that you can find out. It just comes from experience. Red flag number 8, and honestly, it may or may not be a red flag, but it always raises questions. If a property has been under contract several times it fell through, back on the market, why is that? Why? And of course, there can be multiple different reasons for that. One of the first things that comes to mind is that something came up on the inspection. That's obvious. Something's wrong with the property, contract fell through, they didn't want to negotiate. Another possible reason is that it didn't appraise, and the sellers didn't want to negotiate that either, because again, in North Carolina, unless it's new construction, seller doesn't have to negotiate anything. Maybe there's something wrong with the title, which technically all the material facts, including a cloud on the title or whatever came up on the inspection, the listing agent must disclose to everyone. It needs to be in MLS. But again, do you trust what the other agent will say? In any case, property that's been on the market for a while, it's been under contract multiple times, each time it falls through. I will try to find out what happened, because that certainly is a red flag. And last but not least, red flag number 10, especially after the hurricane that we had last year, is anything and everything that has to do with flooding, with flood zones. And a lot of people, most people, immediately think about, oh, we don't want a property that's in the flood zone. Well, of course, I mean, that goes without saying, although we did have some properties that were not in a flood zone but got flooded. So that's something that, your agent can try to investigate and ask around. And you, in fact, that's what I encourage my buyers, can drive around the neighborhood at different times of the day, different times of the week, talk to people, talk to neighbors. You'll be surprised what they share sometimes. The other thing, and that is something that I always pointed out even before the hurricane, things like little creeks and streams and little bridges, or not so little bridges, that take you to the property. Just recently, I was showing a property that was in the neighborhood, and on the way to that neighborhood, we crossed 3 bridges. 2 of them were, public bridges, and I think the county or the city were taking care of them or managing them. But the last bridge was the bridge that took you to the actual neighborhood. And I could tell that it was completely washed away, or it was severely damaged, because it looked brand new. All the properties in that neighborhood were kind of on top of the hill, and so they probably didn't have any damage. Certainly the property we looked at had no damage. It was fine. But to get to the property, you had to cross those 3 bridges, and I guarantee you all those people were cut off during the hurricane and after the hurricane for I don't know how long. not only that, you can be cut off from the civilization and you won't be able to get in or get out. I guarantee you, if it's the little bridge that's within the community, within HOA, or taking you into the community, and it has to be repaired or rebuilt, the cost will fall on you as a homeowner. There's been a lot of HOAs and a lot of communities that had special assessments after the hurricane because they had to do some repairs to infrastructure, or there were a lot of fallen trees that the community had to take care of. So a lot of those HOAs got hit, and a lot of residents got hit with special assessments. So always be kind of mindful of not only the property, what's right around the property, what kind of neighbors you have, and stuff like that, but also how you get to the property. We have a lot of streams and creeks, and a lot of those streams and creeks turned into violent rivers last September and did a lot of damage. So those are the red flags that I wanted to share with you. Again, some of these red flags you can research on your own, you can look them up, some of them you can't. In any case, it is really important to work with somebody who not only, of course, goes without saying, has your best interests in mind, who has experience working in the industry, in this community, living in the industry, and who will do all this other research that you are not able to do on your own.